So, got a lot of stuff going on tonight, but without further ado, I am extremely personally excited to introduce this young man. He is a tour guide, he is a historian, he runs Rekindled History in Salem. He knows about, you name it, Salem, he knows it. So at the end, I know he's going to talk about some stuff, but will you answer a few questions from the audience tonight? So think about some fun questions, and without further ado, VJ Joyce, everybody.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is VJ Joyce. I am the owner and founder of Rekindled History. I am also currently at the Daniels House in Salem, which is one of the oldest bed and breakfast in the United States, as it dates from 1667. And you can take tours through that and all that, so highly recommend checking all that out. I am incredibly excited to be here just because I just love to talk about history, really, at the end of the day. This is perfect, exactly. And so when Lucky invited me in here, I absolutely wanted to come and partake. And really, Salem is one of my most favorite places, really, honestly. I was originally from New Hampshire, but I moved here about 10 years ago, and I fell in love with all the architecture. I mean, I should say I was a bit biased to it because I have my degree in historic preservation and architectural history, but there's so much more that stems from that, because what you do when you learn about the buildings is you of course learn about the people that built them and the societies in which they were built. And so within architectural style, you can get the story of really any era that you want. You can learn, from the details on a building exactly what they were valuing at the time. And one of the greatest things about Salem, and why it was so easy to fall in love with it here, is because this city has, being one of the oldest in the United States, it's going to be celebrating its 400th anniversary in 2026, so just 5 years from now. It has an architecture from every single style. From the 17th century, when this was nothing more than this city has, this being one of the oldest backwater as an early settlement, it's going to be celebrating its 400th anniversary in 2026. Literally one-room houses for families. It has an architecture going all the way up to from the 19th century, 60s, and 70s. This city has being one of the oldest water as every single building right in there between 26 and 26. Literally one-room houses. Salem's history is all in it. Architecture going all the way up to from the 1960s and 70s. You walk down any one of the streets of water as every single building right in more than just driving in. Literally one-room houses. Salem's history is all in it. Architecture going all the way up to from the 1960s. One of the greatest things about this. You walk down any one of the streets of water. For those that are driving into town, well, you're lucky that literally one house. Salem's history is all in and architecture going all the way up. Because what you very much could be one of the greatest things about this. You walk down any one of the streets of water. For those that are driving into town, Salem, well, in its history has literally one house. Salem's history is all in and architecture going all the way up. Because what you very much could be one of the greatest things about this. You walk down any one of the streets. That is kind of one of the greatest things. Salem, well, in its history has literally one house. Salem's history is all one city and architecture going all the way up. Because what you very much could be one of the greatest things about this. You walk down any one of the streets. That is kind of one of the greatest things. Salem, well, in its history has literally one house. Salem's history is all one city and architecture going all the way. Because what you very much could be one of the greatest things about this. You walk down any one of the streets. That is kind of one of the greatest things. Salem, well, in its history has literally one house. Salem's history is all one city and architecture going all the way. Because what you very much could be one of the greatest things about this. You walk down any one of the streets. That is kind of one of the greatest things. Salem, well, in its history has literally one house. Salem's history is all one city and architecture going all the way. Because what you very much could be one of the greatest things about this. You walk down any one of the streets. That is kind of one of the greatest things. So I wanted to say, Salem's history is all one city and architecture going all the way. Because what you very much could be one of the greatest things about this. So Salem was but the founder of Boston enough food. But the founder of Boston. But the founder of Boston. A little bit more than the other. I'm kind of glad that this. But the founder of Boston. A little bit more than the other. I'm kind of glad. They were planning. But the founder of Boston. More than the other. They were planning. But the founder of Boston. More than the other. They were planning. But the founder of Boston. More than the other. They were planning. But the founder of Boston. More than the other. They were planning. But the founder of Boston. But the founder of Boston. The founder of Boston. Colony, and they were continuing to trade throughout the West Indies and across the Atlantic and up and down the coast. But the merchants here, they were getting a little too tired of the yoke that the English had upon them, especially with all the acts that they were creating that were preventing them from going out on these, trading with larger colonies and in larger quantities. Because they were under British rule, they were sort of just seen as a way to provide wealth to the English colony. And over time, the taxes that the British kept imposing on the Americans got too much. And that's when it all exploded. And of course, during the Revolutionary War. But fun fact about Salem, the first skirmish, although bloodless, did happen in Salem for the Revolutionary War. Over in the North Bridge, which connects, of course, this Salem town, where we are here, to the North River, crossing the bridge that is crossing the river that is over by the train station. There was essentially it was called Leslie's Retreat, because these English were sent over from Marblehead to try to capture stores of weapons that were being hidden across the North River in this home. And the townspeople, hearing upon that the English were coming, they drew up the drawbridge to prevent their crossing, and enough time was delayed by a reverend ultimately trying to keep the peace and telling them to go home. Enough time was delayed for which the people over across the North River were able to take those munitions and move them to a separate barn structure. And then the English, just sort of realizing that this was a very tumultuous time and anything could set them off, both these people here, but as well the greater war that was looming. They crossed the bridge, just made a routine inspection, found nothing, and came back, and then went back over. And that was in February. And just a few months later, you have the Battle of Lexington and Concord, with the shot heard around the world. But during the war, this is where Salem's maritime might really played, because what they did is they sent out privateers, and it was essentially legalized piracy by the U.S. government, allowing these traders to ultimately pester the trade lines of the British in order to slow down their advances and be able to supply their troops here. And so this was a very popular way of gaining money, but also being able to maintain this maritime lifestyle, because, of course, they're not going to be able to trade in British waters, which is most of the Atlantic at that point. But they did a really good job at this, and they were able to bring back many, many ships, and a lot of profits were gained by these merchants. And so much so that towards the end of the war, one of the biggest families, the Derby family, in which Derby Street is named after, including Derby Wharf, of course, which is that massive. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it. Right around the corner from us here. It's the Derby family created this massive ship called the Grand Turk, which was used specifically as a privateer. But ultimately, once the war was over, it was one of the first ships that left Salem's port in 1785 to go break out new trade routes for the United States. And this is really what put Salem on the map. Because Salem today is all about the witch trials, especially with the month that we just had, when in and of itself, it was a 15-month span of time in 1692, early 1693. And there was so much more that happened to the story of Salem, but also this country. And it was after the Revolution. It's not like the war was won and it was happily ever after. They needed to build this nation up and do so very quickly, to be gaining its sovereignty, to be recognized by other nations around the world that this was an equal to theirs, this brand new country, especially built off of a democracy, which is an entirely experimental form of government, especially for the time. And so these merchants sent out this one ship called the Grand Turk. It was the first one, and it went further, pushed the limits of where any other merchant had gone before, and that it went over and started to break new trade routes to up into the Baltic, in which they traded. One of the first ports was with St. Petersburg in Russia. And then as well, they went down south and tried to find a route over to China. First, they went over to the Cape of Good Hope, which was a Dutch colony at the time, a big hub. Then they went over to India and traded for things like textiles. And then they went all the way over to China. And it was there in which they brought back massive amounts of tea, cassia cinnamon, which is the spicy type of cinnamon, not the sweet stuff that we're used to. That was first imported into this country in grander quantities than had been seen before. And as well, like porcelain chinaware, the blue and white stuff that we're all familiar with seeing with. All of that was brought in and saw a 200% profit. And every other merchant in town wanted to follow suit of the Grand Turk, because all this money was going to be realized. This is how we're going to build up this nation, through trade and commerce. And so that's exactly what they did. All these other merchants wanted to follow the Grand Turk. In fact, the Grand Turk made such a, grand impression that to this day, its image is immortalized in the Old Spice logo. The ship that you see on the Old Spice logo is the Grand Turk as it left Derby Wharf nearly at the end of our street, or right around the corner from us here. And so all these other merchants sent their own ships out around the world, and they followed the Grand Turk, those same original routes, supplying all these massive goods in huge quantities. But one of them in 1797, led by a Captain Jonathan Carnes, you don't have to remember any of these names. They're going to come up all throughout town when you're walking around. Captain Jonathan Carnes set out on his way to China, and instead of going straight there, he went to Sumatra, what is now Indonesia. And it was there in which he gathered for the first time and brought back to this country in bulk black pepper. Black pepper was first introduced to this country in quantities in which people had yet to ever see before through the port of Salem, through the Derby Wharf National Historic Site, which, little sidebar, is the first National Historic Site in the United States, as was established by the National Park Service in the 1930s. And so when that shipment came back, it saw a 700% profit from this pepper trade. So many other merchants, in fact, got involved, not just in this trade, but all the other sort of Eastern trade too, that when it came to pepper specifically, and as well, of the other spices that we so love and associate with fall, like nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves being brought back from that same area, Salem had essentially a monopoly on pepper for the world. Because so much quantities were able to be gained of pepper from this trade, every other merchant, any other place around the world, I should say, that really wanted to get involved had to go through Salem first. In some ways, Salem's name was synonymous with the United States, and people thought Salem was its own country. There is, in fact, this story of the king of Sumatra overlooking his port and seeing all these ships with the American flag, but not knowing that it was the American flag. They said, or he said supposedly, that, wow, Salem must be such a grand country to have so many ships from there. Ultimately, the name Salem was more greater than the United States because of the trade that these merchants were dealing in. And so that's what really built up Salem, so much so that the literal architecture in the landscape was changed by it. So the Salem Common, that's right next to us over here. The Common used to literally be a swamp. It was called the town swamp. It had 5 little ponds on it. It had a bunch of little hills. It was marshy and reedy. It wasn't a pleasant place to be. In fact, the early militia used that as their training ground, and they were frequently sharing it with cows that were grazing upon the grass that was over there. And so all these merchants, though, with all this newfound money and wealth, wanted to be able to turn it into something that was fitting of the grand nation that they knew they were going to build with all this new wealth coming in. And so they cut down the hills, they filled in the ponds, they laid it down with grass and landscaped it and lined it with trees. But then they lined it with these massive mansions, many of which are still standing today, not just around the Common, but around Salem in general. The big brick 3-story structures that you see all around. In fact, we have a perfect example of one just across the street from the Hawthorne here, right across from the Peabody Essex Museum and Crowhaven Corner, in fact. Those are called federal style mansions, those big brick 3-story ones. And it was built off of the first truly American architectural style after the Revolutionary War. And in fact, what architecture does, and the federal style is a perfect example of this, architecture encapsulates what a society is wanting to think about itself. And as well, what they think about the grand nature of the nation that they're building around it, which is why those big brick 3-story structures are so tall and in your face, especially when you compare them to the previous styles, which are much more diminutive and a lot smaller, because this is sort of wealth being shown off in brick, fully and thoroughly, all 3 stories like that, nothing hidden from view. It's one of the most incredible things. And then as well, Chestnut Street. And if you haven't been down to Chestnut Street yet, I highly recommend you do it. It's right around the corner from the Witch House, just to the west of Salem here. All these merchants who were previously living on the waterfront, what is now the Derby Wharf area, wanted to get away from that dirty, noisy, crowded area as it was becoming. And so what they did is they bought up a ton of acreage over in the west of Salem, which was just old farmland. They paved it with an 80-foot wide street. They lined it with trees, many of which are now so old that they overarch and connect in the center of the street over your head. And then they lined it with their grand mansions, most of them in the federal style, all of them being from about 1804 up to about 1840 for the main block of them or so. And to this day, that street is considered one of the best preserved examples of early American architecture in the United States, because so much wealth flooded into the building of it all that it's encapsulated in the details and the grandeur of these homes that are unmatched. In fact, an early president called it the most beautiful street in America, and in many ways it still is because of how well it's been preserved. But that is ultimately what made Salem Salem and put it on the map, was this maritime age. And that is, in fact, what you see when you're walking around town. Although, just like all good things, it must come to an end. And after the War of 1812, there was an embargo that was seen, which put all the ships and just sort of kept them in stasis. And that was kind of the death knell for it, as the shipping and trading never really returned to that great status of what it was. The ships of the time, these much larger ships than were seen before, couldn't fit into Salem's port, as it was too shallow for to hold these grander boats or ships themselves. And so all the shipping just sort of went down to Boston, and Salem kind of died out as a maritime port. And that's when, in order to regain some of this grandeur, they turned to factories and industrialism. This is around the mid-1800s, in which the United States is seeing the Industrial Revolution, the building of factories all over the place. And so when you go down to Derby Wharf, right on the other side of the wharf, this big white building, you cannot miss it. It's this massive thing. That was one of the first steam cotton factories in the United States. It was built, in fact, in 1835, and they were taking cotton that was being picked from down south and we brought it up here, and they ultimately were turning it into sheets and pillowcases and things of the sort. And that's when trains came in, and they ultimately were feeding a lot of these supply lines from those trains. And so this is really what sort of saw a resurgence a little bit in Salem, but it was ultimately never to the grandeur of what was seen before. And this lasted all the way up to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when Salem continued its commercial ventures, and it became sort of the shopping center, if you could say, of the North Shore here. In fact, a lot of the early department stores had their starts here in Salem. And so this was sort of the hub of it all, come the early 1900s, up until about the 1940s or so. Then you get World War II. And then after World War II, you get one of the big malls that were created because of the creation of the suburbs and all these sort of linking of all these areas by these massive highway projects. You start to have the North Shore Mall, which is over in Peabody in the next town over there. The North Shore Mall drew away all the economic base of Salem. So much so that the town leaders wanted to try to find some way to how do we draw all of this back, because we're sort of bleeding dry here. And so what they did is they decided to turn to what many other cities around the world, around the country, really, and the world, I guess, in general, too, were doing, which was urban renewal. And there was a plan, in fact, put in place. You can find this plan online, in which they wanted to ring a 4-lane highway right through the center of downtown. In fact, the Peabody Essex Museum, literally just up the street from us here, the original granite structure with the big tall windows and the massive anchor sitting out front, that was going to be right next to this 4-lane highway as it was going to ring through downtown. In preparation for this, they demolished hundreds of early 19th and 18th century buildings in order to make way for this plan. The thought was that by demolishing it all, they would make it ripe for developers to come in and see this blank slate and want to do something with it. But after demolishing it all, no developers ever came. And in fact, it just sort of stayed stagnant. So much so that the citizens of the city were absolutely pissed. And what they did is they ousted the mayor. They reconfigured the boards in order to sort of put a stop to this plan and sort of to stem further destruction. They ultimately did, but the damage was done. In fact, to this day, those lots that were demolished now make up the Church Street parking lot right over next to us here, and the Witch City Mall and the parking garage that it is on the site of was this old neighborhood, this grand neighborhood that had a lot of the character of downtown Salem in it, but it had been entirely demolished. Which was when, at this point, that was in the 1970s or so. While they did put a stop to the plan, a lot of the damage was done. But what the city of Salem needed to do was ultimately to bring another resurgence about, something that would bring people back into this city. And that is ultimately when they decided to turn to the history of the trials. And that is, in fact, what you see today when you walk down Essex Street with all the shops as they are, is that it's all about the witch trials and sort of taking advantage of that history, which, for better or worse, I mean, ultimately, it's the thing that is keeping Salem alive. It's just that I hope that, we all sort of recognize what it was originally, what it originally was, and that it ultimately was a tragedy with 20 people murdered, 19 people hung, one person crushed to death as a form of torture, and 200 people accused and set in jail. And for a number of reasons, as mentioned, there's no one singular reason. But ultimately, that is what Salem is known as today, and I think it provides a perfect opportunity to really learn about, what really, what that event was really about, and some of the parallels that we can find, perhaps, as it's a lesson that needs to be learned and continually learned. And actually, that's why The Crucible was such a big thing, as it was written by Arthur Miller, because it paralleled so perfectly with McCarthyism that was happening in the 1950s. And of course, Arthur Miller came to Salem, and we have a lot of history around him there as well. But that right there, and this, of course, that trials history and the notion of Salem being associated inextricably with the trials, it still is here today. I mean, we're still seeing a spillover from the Halloween season, and that's fantastic. In fact, I love that. I should say, as working down at the Daniels house just around the corner here, it's great that we have people coming in and wanting to learn. Not just, they come here for the trials, but they're also then, because you're immersed in this history, you're starting to realize what other parts of history really made Salem what it is, and that's ultimately one of the greatest things, is that people come here for one thing, but they ultimately leave with a greater, broader understanding. And everything I just mentioned is in a tiny little nutshell. It's sort of the history of Salem there. As long as it just provides you a different set of parameters to sort of view this city through, I think that's one of the most important things that could be took away from something like this. And ultimately, I find it amazing that, of course, Salem is the maritime sort of history is really what rules it. And this room, in fact, that we're in is literally shaped like the hull of a ship, the interior of a ship. All of these details are taken from that. In fact, on the roof of this hotel, there is a little meeting house. That's I want to say it's not much bigger than what we're seeing right here, but it's there sort of as sort of the meeting place of this old institution, in which all these ship captains would get together and sort of meet and chat, and their lineages would all get together in that same room. And in fact, it was on this site when the Hawthorne Hotel was built, in which and that was one of the stipulations of being able to build this hotel, is that they had a little space for them up on the roof, and it's shaped, in fact, very similar to what you see here, with all of sort of these big beams and the corner braces and all that, and this is ultimately what it was like in some senses to be in those early ships, and that's why I find the greatest thing about this. I actually saw this for the first time today, just stepping down here, and it was absolutely amazing. This is just so cool, and it's this level of detail that really sort of puts into your mind exactly what made Salem Salem. And that's really one of the greatest things about this city. And I hope as you walk around later tonight, early in the morning, for some reason it takes a while for Salem to wake up. It's usually around 10 or 11 things start to happen. But before that time, it's like the silence of the night. It's crazy. So just walking around in those early, those old streets at that early hour, just getting an idea of what it was like to be back then. That's one of the greatest things about this city, is that you really can get a glimpse of that, 300-year, nearly 400-year history, as long as you stand next to an old building, like the many that we're lucky to still have, and sort of view the streets as they might originally been, with the noises of the modern world mostly sort of turned down for the most part. So that is sort of just a little mini history of Salem, and some recommendations that I want you to sort of take to heart as you walk around today. And there's some amazing history here. Definitely recommend just walking around, reading the signs, looking at the house plaques, and it's one of the greatest assets that we have. So I don't know how much time left we have. I would love to. Yeah. This is perfect. So if there are any questions about Salem, anything I just talked about, or anything just tangential to it, I'm here to talk history. So let's do it. Yes. Yes. So Salem, everything is kind of near in Salem. Salem, the city of Salem is only about a mile wide, but Essex Street right here, if you just follow Essex down 3 four-way intersections, you're going to hit the Witch House. Once you see the Witch House, you take a left and then your first right, and you're right on Chestnut Street. Absolutely. Oh, yes, exactly. Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah, right there. Yes, exactly. Yeah, right around the corner from there. Yeah, highly recommend that one. In fact, the Phillips House, which is owned by Historic New England, is the only home on that street that you can enter into. And since it is the weekend coming up, they should be open, and I recommend taking a look inside. Some of the grandeur of those homes is unreal. There's, in fact, a house on that street. It's a private home, unfortunately, but you can take a look at the photos on Zillow if you wanted. They lined, as wallpaper in their home back in the early 1800s, they lined it with essentially the packaging that came in on these old tea chests. It's essentially like taking the brown paper that comes in your packages today and putting it up on your walls. That was essentially the same idea. But it was so sort of grand at the time, with all this Asian artwork on it, that to this day it's sort of been now faded to a silver color, but all the decorative work is still there. And it's just one of those things that they wanted to take advantage of there. It's a great question. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, please. Oh yeah. Yeah, it was a 15-month span of time. Yep. It started in, I believe it was January or so of 1692, is when one of the first accusations were starting to ramp up and were about to happen in February. And then it ended in the later half of 1692, early 1693. So about 15-month span of time for the whole thing. Of course, there was a much longer lead up to it, but the official trials, as far as those ran, yeah, that was about a 15-month span. 19 supposed accused witches were hung, and one was crushed to death as a form of torture, as a way to force a confession out of him of witchcraft. One of the odd things about the trials is that you almost lived longer if you confessed to being a witch, versus if you denied it, you were more likely than not to be killed sooner rather than later. Because again, it's one of these weird, twisted things of how the magistrates of the time ran it. They very much This is a bit of speculation, but after 300 years of history, there's a lot of theories that play into this. Is that the magistrates themselves were using it as a way to hold on to power, because Puritanism is starting to wane at this point in the latter half of the 1600s, and so the magistrates do things like, if you admitted to being a witch, you were kept alive. The thought was that you would be there to name other witches in your midst, which was actually, that logic was broken down later that year in 1692 when someone brought up the fact that, well, if these witches are supposedly under the devil's spell and the devil is the king of lies, then why should we listen to anything that these people have to say? Because they would just be ultimately, it would be the devil working through them just to get more innocent people killed and brought over to his side. And so it's they were using horrible logic such as that, many of which was broken down even at the time. But ultimately, yes, 20 people were killed because of it. 200 or so were set in jail after being accused, the accusation took nothing more than this small group of young women and girls claiming that someone was a witch, through spectral evidence, which no one else could see except for these young women and girls, and as well through rumors entirely. Yes. Have I personally? No, never seen a ghost. Personally, no, but many people have. I will say, okay. Please, yeah, exactly. I just need the right people there. No, I will say people have seen, and these are stories I only tell you because they've been corroborated by many people. I am in no way a skeptic. I fully believe in it. I just know I haven't had anything physically happen to me.
If you stick around tonight when I do my seance,
you might see something, yeah. And maybe that's it, maybe that's entirely that too. This is something falling into this sort of this world of the supernatural when it came to living in Salem, which is just always here. It's just, I came into it from a historical side. And so this is entirely a new field for me. But I so strongly believe that buildings themselves, they have souls. I mean, they've been lived in just because I'm so used to the Daniels house, for in that case 354 years. And the amount of people that came through there is just wild. And there's no way you can't tell me that nothing has sort of been left behind in that regard. And so to tell you some of the stories that have been told to me and been corroborated by many people is early in the morning, people will claim to feel they don't see it, but they feel a cat sort of jump up onto their bed. And then occasionally that will be followed up by the cat. They don't see the cat, but they see its paws like kneading. Yeah, exactly. Sort of in the bed next to them. And another common one is that in the back hallway of one of the rooms up on the third floor, there is a woman sort of dressed in black Victorian like mourning garb, sort of pacing back and forth. And we think we know who that might be. We ultimately don't know for sure because in the Victorian era, a lot of people came through the home. But there was one particular person, a woman who, if my memory is serving me right, she lived there and her husband passed away at sea. And so that's just one small, slight possibility, but there's no way to know exactly who she would have been as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, by all means, yeah. Yeah.
There's a widow's walk upstairs on top of this, and that there's a woman that walks the halls on the 6th floor because there's a door there that they would go up to wait for the ships to come in. Her husband never came back, so she's constantly walking the halls waiting for her husband to come back. So
wow. Oh, fascinating. Yes, that's what it is. Yes. Wow. Well, that's interesting because from the roof of this hotel, even though it wasn't built at the time, you would have been able to see, although there was a tall building here at the time, you would have been able to see at the end of what is now Hawthorne Boulevard was the coastline. Ships used to be docked right at the end of the street of the Hawthorne, right down here. And that was, in fact, one of the more popular coves in town. And if you look out, if you step out the sidewalk and look down sort of Hawthorne Boulevard with Essex Street on your right, you'll notice the land kind of gently slopes down. And that's because it's originally sloping down to the harbor where ships would normally dock as the harbor came way far in. In fact, Front Street, if you're over near the Old Town Hall, Front Street is called Front Street because it fronted on the water. And today it's now, you would never guess the water came in that far, but it was a huge, massive river at one point. The South River was, before they filled it all in during that industrial era with the factories. And so that's what I mean about the Salem's history always being there visible. It's just, if you just look at the topography of the land, if something seems a little too flat, it's probably because it was filled in from a later period of time. Everything sort of gently slopes up from the original bounds of the river, and that's very easy to see as you walk around. In fact, the Charter Street Cemetery, the oldest cemetery in Salem and one of the oldest in the nations, that used to look over what now looks over a gas station and a restaurant. It used to look over the river, as when you're standing at the edge of the Charter Street Cemetery, just straight down was this massive bluff right onto the river, and you'd be able to look over and just nothing but fields beyond as far as the eye could see. It would have been one of the most beautiful sights. And to the point about how quiet it is here, it's likely in the earliest days they would have been experiencing silence that we are never going to experience in our lives. Very likely not. Just with the hum of electricity that is constant nowadays, and the traffic noise, no matter how far off, as long as a highway is anywhere near, you're going to get that constant drone. And so they would have absolutely, and that's one of the greatest things about being here in Salem and early in the morning or late at night, is that the din of the traffic is as far as it can go. And it's usually so quiet, especially sort of in this part of town, especially walking around the common. It's almost eerie in some ways, but I recommend doing it for that reason. Any other questions? Oh, yes, please. I do love the Salem Common. Probably my favorite would be next to Chestnut Street, there is, William Street, which is right off of the Common. William Street is a nearly perfectly preserved street, not because it was a home of wealthy people, just because it was it was mostly neglected a lot of the times, and that usually old homes get demolished for new ones to come in because people that had money back then tore down these old homes to put up new ones. But that street in and of itself is one of the most well-preserved ones, and almost in some ways by accident. But probably my favorite is either the Salem Willows, which I highly recommend going down. It's an old Victorian seaside community with all these houses from about 1840 all the way up to about like early 1900s, just crammed right next to each other. And they're all these characteristic kind of like Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket type homes, and that they're very close together, but all very detailed as the Victorian era allowed it for. But the Derby Street neighborhood right over here, it's one of the oldest neighborhoods in Salem, and its streetscape is nearly original, almost in its entirety. So you can walk down those streets, and occasionally you'll find homes that have always been there, next to homes that were, say, like the home of the captain of the Friendship, which is a replica ship on Derby Wharf. His home is still standing there, and they just happened to just choose that ship to replicate. So those would be my favorite areas of town, but I just love recommending to people just walk around. It's one of the greatest things. You don't have to spend any money, and you can just really get a sense of what it was like because of how well the city has been preserved, and just the peace that you get out there is just, it's amazing. It really is. Well, thank you all so much.
Guys, give it up. Come on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I learned so much, like in 40 minutes?
I know.
That
I
was
can't
so
believe
cool.
that.
I know.
There's a lot there, but there's a lot more.
Thank you so much, honey. Thank you so much. And don't forget to go to the Daniel's house next time, because he'll be there doing tours, and that place is haunted AF, okay? Hello. Raise your hand. That's so bright. I'm glad this is covering my wrinkles. Raise your hand if this is your first time to Salem. Oh, my girls here from the South. You guys, where are you from? Really? Did you fly in? Oh, you drove? Awesome. And you guys flew in. Where'd you park your brooms? I had to say it. We're in Salem. I had to say it. So everybody else besides these four people have been to Salem. Shout out some of your favorite places that you've been to since you've been here. Anyone? Jesus Christ. We have to... Donnie, let's go to the ship. This is boring. No. I love the wharf area too. And you know, I arrived Thursday, and I was supposed to meet Kat and Jim here, and they were coming in from Vermont. So I came in from Pennsylvania, and I got here a couple hours before they did. And my favorite place to do when I just want to do nothing is drive to Salem Willows. It's down by the water. In the heyday, there's skee ball machines in the summer, and there's ice cream, and you can get pizza, and it's just a beautiful area. But since we have a few minutes talking about Salem Willows, I read a book a long time ago called A Scream on the Water. It's a true story, a horrific story. And I talked about this story on my podcast when I had it, called Grave Encounters. And I know Lauren and Danny probably have heard the episode. But it was about a woman, and she was walking her dog along the willows one day back in the early 1970s. It's an area where you can walk your dogs, you can, have barbecues and cookouts and stuff. It's really a friendly family area. And she befriended a guy named Tom Maimone, and he was walking his dog too. And they kind of hit it off. She was a married woman, and Tom was, he owned a boat. And he used to invite some of his friends and people in the area for rides on his boat. And he invited her on his boat one day, and she never came back. Yes. And long story short is that he had a history of bringing women on his boat and subjecting them to do things that they didn't want to do, or he threatened he was going to throw them overboard. And so after the story came where she came missing, a lot of women came forward and said that he had done this, and she never returned. And about 5 days later, after she went missing, a Gloucesterman in Gloucester found her body tied to a lobster trap. And the book is called The Scream on the Water. It's horrific. It's a horrific story, but that's what happened on Salem Willows. And Laurie Cabot was instrumental in finding Thomas Maimone when he took off from the area after he murdered Martha. And Laurie had told the police that he's heading north. You guys have to go to Canada and find him. I see him on a straight beeline up north, where they found him up in Maine in a cabin about 5 miles away from the Canadian border. So she helped find this guy and prosecute him, and he died in jail. He got what he wanted. But that's my little freaky story about Salem Willows. So listen, who's up next? My kids over here. Hey. I would love the time right now to introduce two friends of mine. They are part of Mass Con Paranormal that Lauren Perez and Danny Perez run. Lauren and Danny will be speaking tonight, and Danny and Lauren have brought some haunted items tonight. They are contained, so their energies will not affect us. But two of their members of their team are modern-day witches. They're amazing, amazing individuals. They're spiritually beautiful people, Karen and Kenneth.
Hey everybody, how are you? Good. So Karen and I have scripts, please forgive us, but we're both very air-like. We have air signs in our charts all over. And if we don't have a script, we'll go overboard, as our friends will know. But tonight should be easy because we haven't had any wine.
Not yet. Probably after this, but not yet. Yes. That sounds like a plan. Okay, so like Kenny said, we are both modern-day witches. Of course, everybody is fascinated about the Salem witch trials. Many of us learned about it in school around the fall holidays. Or many of us, especially from New England, visited Salem on school field trips. I know that I did as a child. But are witches real? Are they real people, real human beings?
Now I want to ask everybody to take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, close your eyes. When you hear the word witch, what images come to your mind? Is it the image of a hunched-over old woman?
Is it perhaps a vengeful stepmother?
Or is it the green-skinned woman with a long nose covered in warts?
And now you may open your eyes. These silly depictions of witches are simply not true. They are only found in fairy tales and, of course, in Hollywood. That's where most of us learn about witches as children. You may or may not be shocked to find out that real witches live among you.
Actually, as Lucky Ed said, the two of us that stand before you now are real witches. I'm a nurse who regularly practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I also, like I said earlier, enjoy drinking a glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine, maybe a whole bottle of wine.
You want me to grab a bottle right now?
That would be great.
Oh, yeah, we're good sharers. We're good sharers. By day, I teach 7th grade English as a second language in Fitchburg, and at night, I teach ESL to adults. I am also a hypnotherapist, Reiki Shambhala master, cook, baker. I have made candles in the past, yes. But I'm also a mother. My son is here tonight. And I am also, I recently started taking tap dance lessons with my sister. So as you can see, witches are, well, I won't say normal, but, you know, we have, I know, but, you know, we have the same professions as anybody else.
So what does it mean to be a witch? Does it mean you can lift a friend up in the air with a silly little chant? Does it mean you can turn that teacher you don't like into a toad?
I'm pretty sure my students, especially this week, would love to do that to me. Unfortunately, no. Being a witch is so much more than that. Yes, we do perform magic, which we'll get into a little bit later, but there's so much more to it. It's a religion. It's a spiritual, personal journey. It's about your inner soul's development and your place in the universe. It's about your own growth and your own self being the best version that you can be.
And Wicca helps you become familiar with spirits. It helps you become familiar with the cycles of life. We all strive for a lifelong relationship with our deities. As an earth-based religion, the path of Wicca and witchcraft reveres nature and her cycles. Wicca helps us connect with every living creature around the world. It shows us the connection between the divine and us and in life. And as Deepak Chopra once said, you're not the drop in the ocean, but the ocean and the drop.
So in the religion of Wicca, there is both the mother and the father aspect. It's all about balance. There are countless names for the faces of deities in the Wiccan tradition. Wiccans believe that the spirit comes to you, and whatever avatar is best understood by you, it can be any one of the pantheons, such as the Greek or the Mayan, Aztec, Egyptian, even Christian. There are Christian witches, Hindu, and so on. We believe that no one has the right to judge another person's path or journey. We are not a cult. We do not try to lure you in or, sell your soul to the devil or any of that sort of thing. So it's more of a spiritual, personal journey, and it's very unique and highly individualized. It's whatever resonates with you. Wiccans have a very strong moral code, not only with Gaia, which is whom we call Earth, with love and care, but every living creature on it. So we honor plants, animals. To us, everything has energy. There's one law, however, that most traditions agree upon, and that is do as you will, but harm none.
As a nurse, I use witchcraft to not only heal myself physically, but also spiritually. I do that same with my individuals that I take care of. I work at a group home, and my individuals have severe brain damage. The best part about what I do is I'm allowed to come in and use crystals to work with them with sound therapy. But I'm also a correctional nurse during another part of my day. I go into the prison system in a maximum security prison. So a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll use herbs and oils and anoint myself as a form of protection because I don't know what I'm getting into when I go into the prison. I wear certain jewelry that I enchant with magical protection properties. But I also do self-care, which is probably the biggest thing for anybody in the healthcare field. And I think the simplest form of witchcraft is, self-care. It's that blessing your coffee before you go out about your day. It's sitting in a hot bath with herbs and salts and putting your favorite candle on with your favorite music. Those few examples seem small, but they do impact a lot, especially right now in the healthcare system, because like I said, the pandemic has taken a toll on everybody, especially us healthcare workers.
So being pagan means also that we celebrate different religions than the Christian religions. However, that's not to say that we don't celebrate Christian religions with family and friends who are Christian. So we're very open that way. I still celebrate the holidays with my family as well. We have 8 what we call Sabbats, which are the major holidays, and they are ceremonies that honor the deities. And the first one is Yule, which is coming up, and that's also the winter solstice, December 20 to the 23rd. That is the longest night of the year, and we celebrate the return of the sun, even though it does not seem so when it's, pitch black when you wake up in the morning. But it is when the days are starting to become slowly but surely a little bit lighter. So the Oak King and the Holly King battle, and the Oak King wins, and he reigns until the summer solstice, which is in June. Santa Claus is also a pagan idea. He comes from a version of the Holly King because it is said that he would wear a sprig of holly in his tousled hair, and he drives a team of 8 stags, which is very similar, of course, to Rudolph and Santa Claus. It was celebrated by lighting bonfires in the fields. Children were given gifts of cloves, spiked apples, and oranges, which represented the return of the sun. And they were given and made from baskets from evergreen boughs and stalks of wheat dusted with flour. The boughs symbolized immortality. The wheat symbolized the harvest, and the flour was a symbol of triumph, light, and life. A sprig of holly was placed near the doorway, year-round to promote good fortune, hence the mistletoe. Traditionally, it had to have been harvested from the landowner's land or received as a gift. So it was brought into the house and decorated, and that's how we have the current mistletoe tradition. There's also the Yule log, which is traditionally a birch, but any type of log will burn or can be used. Sorry. What they would do traditionally, they would burn the log all night, and it would smolder for an additional 12 days. And today, traditionally, we do that as well. It can be oak, pine, and a lot of times we drill 3 holes on the top of it and place candles. Many of the deities that are associated with Yule are Briod, Isis, Demeter, Gaia, Diana, the Great Mother, Apollo, Ra, Odin, the Oak King, the Divine Child, which many of us know, of course, as Jesus. And many spell casting that we might do during the Yuletide season would be for peace, harmony, love. So as you can see, there's many similarities between the Christmas holiday and the Yule holiday.
The next holiday that we celebrate is Imbolc. A lot of times we'll call it Lightmas for short, but it is from the Gaelic in the belly, symbolizing the time of year when the sheep were pregnant, were able to give milk again. It is a happy celebration symbolizing the return of spring, and it is the halfway mark between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Crops and animals are blessed to ensure the year of abundance. First buds begin to appear. The Celtic fire goddess Bridget is honored. She represents healing, midwifery, smithcraft, and poetry. Bridget's crosses are made from wheat stalks and are a symbol of protection and prosperity for the coming year. Besoms or brooms are placed by the front of the door to symbolize sweeping out the old and welcoming the new. If you want to get rid of your guests that have stayed too much during the holidays, just flip your broomstick over. Candles are lit around the house to honor the rebirth of the sun. A crown of light is worn by the high priestess to symbolize the return of the goddess to her maiden form. And while the sun god has reached puberty, the following are correspondence to Imbolc, which the deities are Bridget, and our spell casting for it is luck and prosperity.
Next we have Ostara, which is the spring equinox, and it's also the Christian Easter. It is the halfway point, and through spring, night and day are equal, so everything is in balance. It is a time to celebrate new life, fertility, and growth. The correspondence is related to Ostara. We have deities Aphrodite, Adonis, and for spell work, a lot of seed spells, manifestations for the upcoming year.
Now the next one is Karen's favorite. It's Beltane. A little behind the scenes story. Karen and I are both, we both are high priest and high priestess of a coven. We both teach first degree students, and one year we decided to do a Beltane ritual. So I made up the script and jokingly gave her everything that was inappropriate to say, and she blushed and said from this day forward she would not talk about Beltane, that it would be my job.
In my defense, if I get in awkward or uncomfortable situations, I laugh. And so I do not want to seem like a 5-year-old and embarrass myself. So I gave the honor to my counterpart.
So for Beltane, it's a festival of fire. It is on May 1st, and it marks the halfway point between spring and summer. The days become longer and warmer, and summer approaches. Bonfires are lit to give thanks to the fertility of the spring, and there's usually dancing around a maple, which is the phallic symbol. It is a celebration of sex, passion, and vitality. Being opposite a Samhain, the veil between worlds is also thin during this time. This is a festival of the living, where Samhain is a festival of the dead. It is easier to connect with past loved ones and ancestors. Flowers are also gathered to decorate homes. Women wore flowers in their hair. The young god approaches manhood and falls in love with the goddess. They marry, and she becomes pregnant with the god. Deities for this holiday are the Green Man, Pan, Luna, Gaia. Our spellcasting that we do during this time is self-discovery, love, union, and personal growth.
Next we have Litha, which is the summer solstice, typically somewhere between June 19th and June 23rd. And this is when we celebrate the longest day of the year and the shortest night of the year. And the sun god has reached his greatest, most powerful strength, and we recognize it, and we know that it will soon start to wane. It is a time when the fairies come out to play, and yes, I have in real life seen fairies a couple of times, so I'm definitely a believer. And they like to come out and play pranks on humans. So it is a time when the crops are starting to bloom. It's a time to celebrate the abundance of your crops, or any abundance that you might have, fertility, and just the bounty, and just a time to celebrate nature. It is when the first of the magical herbs are harvested, and it is also a time for hand fastings, which is the Wiccan tradition of a commitment ceremony. The Oak King and the Holly King battle once again, but this time the Holly King wins, and then we celebrate the coming of the shorter days and the coming of winter, which most of us do not celebrate, but for deities, Gaia, Apollo, and we do spells for healing and protection.
The next sixth holiday that we celebrate is Lunasa, which is the first harvest. It is the Gaelic festival honoring the first harvest of the year and honors the Celtic sun god Lu. Wheat, barley, and corn are now ripe. It is also called Lammas, which means loaf mass. It symbolizes when the Irish were converted to Christianity, loaves of bread were baked from the first grains and laid on church altars as offerings. We are now fully in the waning half of the year. The deities that we celebrate are Lu, and the spellcasting we do are prosperity, connectedness, career, health, financial gain, reflection, release of fears, hopes, and dreams, and we also do desires.
The seventh Sabbat is Mabon, or the Autumn Equinox, which is my favorite, September 21st through September 24th. So darkness starts to overtake light, so you notice that pretty soon it'll be dark at 4 or 4:30. But it is a time of rest and gratitude. It is the Pagan Thanksgiving. We do still celebrate the American Thanksgiving, but this is like our Thanksgiving as well. Thanking, the earth for the harvest and all of the crops. It revolves around the life, death, and rebirth cycle, and honors the Welsh god Mabon. It is also the second harvest festival, and a time when the animals were slaughtered and they were prepared for the coming winter. for food. It is a time for looking forward to spring, which is we still do that when it's getting cold. You start thinking about what you're going to plant for the upcoming harvest. And we celebrate Dionysus, Demeter, and for spell work, we make magic for protection, harmony, and balance.
Now y'all may be thinking, I'm not sure I want to start practicing witchcraft because it sounds like you have a lot of holidays, and with that, we also eat a lot. So it's no surprise that Samhain is our next of our harvests. It is traditionally on November 1st, the Witch's New Year, and the sun is at its lowest of the year. The third harvest is celebrated by preparation for winter. The veils between the worlds are thinnest once again, so it is a time to celebrate and honor our dead and our loved ones. The god has died and returned to the underworld. Cattle and livestock were slaughtered at this time in preparation for the winter. Any crops left were considered taboo and were left in the fields as offerings to nature spirits and the fairies. Bonfires, deities that were honored during this time were the horned god, Cronus, Osiris, Hecate, and our spells that we do is anything to keep negativity from your past out of your future in connection with the dead and manifestation for the coming year.
Which is, we also celebrate other types of holidays called Sabbats, which is actually the moon, the cycles of the moon. They're more personal in nature. It is a time for covens or individuals or groups to get together and focus more on individual work, maybe some shadow work, letting go of things that you're trying to delete from your life, people, habits, any of that. So usually, so we have the full moon, of course, the dark moon, and the new moon. It's not always, of course, feasible to celebrate right on that night, but 3 days before or 3 days after also will work fine.
And we, of course, will end our night talking about a very popular topic, magic. What is magic? The word magic comes from the Greek word magikos. Don't kill me for my pronunciation. I am not Greek. Just disclaimer. It means power of the magi. In the late 1300s, the word magic was added to the English language from the French word magique, meaning the art of producing marvels or influencing events with unseen natural forces. This is a more accurate definition than the modern-day dictionary will give you. The art of producing illusion as an entertainment by the use of sleight of hand, deceptive devices, and etc.
The 21st century, which, however, would describe the magic as the following. And I quote, "Magic is the art of consciously participating in the co-creative forces of the universe and by directing desired change in one's life." And that is a quote by Lisa Chamberlain. And she wrote a book called Wicca for Beginners. Also, magic is very much about finding your connection to the earth and all that is natural and alive and moving around in the universe, as everything is energy. It binds all that exists together. Magic is living in balance with the flow of life and knowing that you are a vital force within that flow. Magic is everywhere. It's in the trees. It's in the rain, the stars, flowers. It's in all of you. It's in us. It's everywhere. Magic is laughter and joy. It's wonder and truth of the world around us. It is the subtle enchantment that reminds us not to waste a single moment of this gift that we call life.
Magic is not greed, it is not power, It is not pretense. It is real. It exists, and it does work. Magic is the mystery that lies in the secret soul of the world. It is the essence of creation. What you imagine and what you put out, you create, and it comes back. Excuse me. With it, you can create your dreams, heal your world, love your life, and find the peace that lives in every human heart. Witches use various methods and techniques to connect their power to the powers that govern the universe by setting intentions and watching them manifest into the physical plane. So as you can imagine, us witches are not against science. We actually enjoy science.
Some of us enjoy science. That's why I teach English.
This is true.
So magic, you might have seen it at one point spelt with a K on the end of it. And this spelling was coined by Aleister Crowley, who was largely associated with occultism and influenced Wicca's Gerald Gardner. The reason for magic being spelled with the letter K was to differentiate it from, kids playing and stage shows and that sort of thing. So the goal of magic is to focus and improve one's own life. We do not do magic for harm or for anything negative that goes against what we believe in. That's not to say that there are not people out there who do that, because there's plenty who do that, but we have chosen a different path. I lost what. Okay. So sometimes you can cast a spell if you want a new job, or if you need money, prosperity, love. I always caution people when performing a love spell, because the universe listens and does pay attention. So make sure you are very specific about what you want and don't want.
And not Tom down the street stalking you through the window, right?
Yes. So whenever you're casting a spell for anything, choose your words wisely.
Clear intent.
Yes.
So magic for personal gain should never be frowned upon, as long as you follow the Wiccan rede, which, if it harms none, do as you will. Magic should only be done if there is a true need for it, however. Magic is not used as any way out to show it to your friends. Commonly, many witches work together in covens, as we do. And in covens, you can raise energy up and send it out to a loved one. But when you're doing that, you need to ask the person receiving the energy if it's okay to send them the energy. A lot of times during national crises or crises around the world, we gather in a coven to raise up that energy and to send it out, whether it be peace, love, healing. Witches work magic around Sabbats and Sabbats to set intentions and balance and growth in the upcoming months.
So, how does one become a witch? Anyone can become a witch. There's no formal, conversion process. You don't have to, go through all these tests, answer these questions, or that sort of thing.
Ancestry.com.
Yeah. Yes. It's not closed to anyone, and like I said, it's not a cult. We don't try to recruit people by any means. I love speaking about it. I love talking about it, educating people about it, but I would never, ever try to force somebody to join us. The best way to begin is simply by research. Ask fellow witches, go to the library. There's, I have found books in my city library, Amazon, of course, and most chain bookstores have several books on the subject as well. and of course the internet, because as we know, everything is true on the internet. So that's a great place. But no, if you don't have a lot of money to invest in, a new library full of books, the internet is a great way to learn about it. Just be careful of where you're surfing. Let's see, what else?
Then also another great way to find local witches is just go on Facebook. There's plenty of witches out there that use the internet. We're not just in books, but we're surfing the webs as well.
All right, I think that was about it. Thank you. Any questions?
And then is there any questions?
Yes.
Any questions? Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so very much for expressing this because I've always been interested in Wiccan and thought it was like, everybody growing up Catholic told me devil, 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 whatever. And you two are amazing and have enlightened me particularly about it. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you said.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And we're also
Thank you so much.
recovering Catholic and recovering born again
Yes.
Christian. So
Thank you, Kenneth and
thank
Karen.
you so much.
I think there was a question in the back. I thought I saw. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh, we have a couple, I think.
How do people balance being a Christian and being a witch?
Well, yes, even the act of blowing out a candle on a birthday is like a ritual. And, I've only known of one Christian witch in my life. But, for us, we believe Jesus was a real person. He was a human being. But we believe he was a human being, not, the son of. Right.
Right. And a lot of it too is your deep down understanding and knowing your own intuition. For me, Jesus Christ is a master healer. He's an ascended master. So what that means is he had certain powers, certain gifts, but no one would call him a witch. They call him a rabbi.
Yes.
Yes.
How much time do we have?
Well, we're going to break after this, and we're going to try to get upstairs and visit our wonderful vendors, so take your time. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'll be quick. I'll give the very condensed version. I floundered. I went to a Catholic high school. I just always questioned it. I thought, why is it if I tell some guy my sins, that's going to make me, like Jesus? And I thought, I'm not buying it. But, I did the Catholic, my first marriage, I did the Catholic wedding, the whole bit. And, several years later, I just was in kind of a dark space. And I said, I need something that I can believe in. I watched all the Jesus shows on the History Channel, National Geographic, because I wanted so badly to believe, but I said, I can't. So I went on the internet, I read books, I started researching about religions that I felt that I resonated with, and I found Wicca, and I said, that's me! I read it in black and white, I said, that's me, that's it, I'm converting, that's it. And I did. Sure.
Yeah, Cunningham.
I would say Cunningham is a great author. He has several books. He has beginners books. I'm reading one of his books now. The
Solitary Witch?
No, not the Solitary Witch. The psychic. The big red book. Okay, I'm
We
sorry.
also
I'll
have
look it up.
1,000 books.
I know. I have a full library. But definitely Cunningham is a great author.
And then for me growing up, I was I was out of the house at 15. I was always, doing small rituals around myself, almost like a natural gift to just go with the flow type thing. But as I got older, like Karen said, I kind of went through different religions to see where I kind of fit, where I kind of clicked. And the one thing that stood out to me is that source or deity is like a diamond. It has many facets. So as many facets as that diamond has is how many names we have for God or source or creator. So everybody has the right God. We just call him a different name or her a different name. And that's how I explained, like, I'm never against one religion. I think all of us are on the same path. No problem. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lucky.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Love you, girl. Love you guys. Hello. Cat, what's the guy's name? What is it? Gerald. I'm gonna keep it clean. Forget it. I ain't saying nothing. Yeah. Oh, we're live. Oh, we're live. We're live on NEPS TV on YouTube. Yes. I am the founder of New England Paranormal Society, and my friend Kat, who runs Psych Paranormal, is now my manager for New England Paranormal, and we have a TV station on YouTube, and we are going to be traveling around, well, when I'm not doing my other TV show, traveling around the country visiting obscure places, and it's going to be broadcast on NEPS TV on YouTube, so follow us. Fun. And the gentleman behind the curtain is James Lawler, everybody. He's the technical wizard. I would like to, without getting emotional, because if most of you know, especially my niece, I am a very intuitive, sensitive psychic medium and a ghost hunter. But when it comes to things that I love and have passion for, the tears flow. So without ado, I would like to, Ellen, would you please stand up? Get your ass off that chair. Ellen Mcneil is the founder of Spirits of New England. Her group is actually 5 years older than my group. Come on up there, Mama. Ellen is my co-host for the event this weekend. She's the vendor vixen. She has coordinated and brought all of our wicked awesome vendors to the event tonight, and tomorrow there'll be different ones. So what I'd like to do right now, because the vendors are itching for people up there, they have a bunch of amazing things up on the second floor in the Essex rooms. We're going to break for 20 minutes, and then if you would please just go visit them, make them feel wanted, spend $5. If you do, I'll give it back to you, so get the hell up there.